It's been so long since last time I uploaded some video on YouTube. Today I'd like to talk about something slightly different. I have been uploading Laravel application development videos for a long time. So today I'd like to introduce you something called the distributed ID generator. In some real production environment or your web development, you may need a distributed ID generator, something like Twitter. So you can see here, this is some very old blog, over 10 years ago, announced by Twitter, a project called Snowflake or Algorithm. The requirement is that they need some service that can generate tens of thousands of IDs per second in a highly available manner. So you may need the same thing or same service in your product. Typically, you can use some database primary key to do the same thing. But today, let's see how we can use Snowflake algorithm announced by Twitter to develop a very own distributed ID generator. Okay, let's start. So in general, if you want to implement on your own, that's totally fine. So you just go through the algorithm principle, the Snowflake, and yeah, develop on your own. Besides, you can also look for some existing implementation. Now I'd like to introduce you is that the Snowflake project on GitHub by Twitter has already been archived. You can still try to use it. Otherwise, I suggest you go to the tool called Hutool. If you are not familiar with Chinese, you cannot read Chinese, it's totally fine. You can go to their GitHub repository. It's here. So GitHub. So you can see here, this is the project, and it's totally open source. So you can look into the code base. What we are going to use today is a module called the Hutool-core. So this is a core module. It's pretty popular actually on GitHub. If you are not familiar with it, feel free to check it out. There must be some features or tools you can use in your day-to-day development. So long story short, let's get started. So look into the Hutool core. We already have the Snowflake implemented, the algorithm implemented. So I'm going to use Spring Boot framework to quickly build up my application and set up an endpoint for ID generation. So every time when we make an API call to the endpoint, we should be able to get a unique ID. Okay, now let's start. Actually, here I have already created. So follow the. If you are using IntelliJ, you can create a project as a Spring project with the Spring initializer tool. So you can do it on your own. So give a try. Here we already have the project skeleton set up here. Nothing fancy, just a plain Spring Boot project. Now let's create a class which is for the ID generator service. I'd like to put it in a package called controller and the ID controller. Okay, this is a controller. I will use the REST controller annotation for this class, and I like to map it to /id. So all the endpoints defined by this controller will be mapped to id, the root path id. Simple enough. String generate. Okay, we don't need any input, so it's a GET request. So we'd like to get a random ID or unique and random ID. So this is the endpoint I need to define generate. Okay, let's return ABC. This is just to make sure the endpoint works. So we can run the Spring Boot application. So it should be started quickly enough on 8080 port. So let's come back here, localhost 8080/id/generate. Now you can see, okay, it's returning ABC. Now it's a time to use Snowflake supported by Hutor. Let's go to Palm XML. We need to add a dependency to Hutor core. There are multiple groups supported. We use cn.hutor with version 5.8.7. So that's relatively the newest version. So it might be 5.8.8, but it doesn't matter. This is new enough, so it already supports Snowflake algorithm. You might need to add, depending on your local Maven setting, you may need to add a repository for the Maven Central repository server. This is no ID. This is you might need to add if you don't have it. Central URL. This repository has the required Hutor dependency cn Hutor and core. Okay, so this is what I just mentioned. So it might not be the latest version, but it's good enough for us. 5.8.7. By the way, if you want to use Spring Boot command line interface to manage your project or application, feel free to check out the official documentation for how to install and use the CLI. Okay, now as we have already added dependency to Hutor core, let's see what we can use. I'll show you that the Snowflake class from the dependency has the implementation here. So you can look into the source code and check out if it fully suit your use case. You can also compare with the Twitter Snowflake algorithm, see if it's the correct implementation. Otherwise, you can also do it on your own. By the way, you can also port this implementation to different programming languages. So you can use in, for example, JavaScript or even Golang. Okay, that's not the focus for me today, so I'm going to use Snowflake. Pay more attention here is that there are multiple constructors you can use. The principle is that you give the worker ID and data center ID to the Snowflake class. They will be used to generate the unique ID in the distributed manner. Okay, so this is how you can set up your ID generator cluster service, which is supposed to be distributed. Okay, that's it. Now let's come back to the ID controller. We'd like to have a private Snowflake instance for this controller. We don't have to pass worker ID and the data center ID. It will generate for us, but we can also pass if we like, say the worker ID 1000, data center ID 1. So that's how we can create a Snowflake instance. Then we can use it to get the next ID. We can get a string or long type ID, depending on our use case. So for now, we are returning a string. So we use next ID string. Now we need to restart the application. Once it's restarted, we should be able to make the API call and get a unique ID every time. Okay, I think there's something wrong. I forgot to mention here. So if you look into the ID here, there's some requirement. The maximum data center ID is 31. So we call, yeah, it is 31, right? Yeah, that's great. Let's look into the error. So we can reduce the ID constructor. Okay, let's make it smaller. It's worker ID 1. So the first worker in the first data center. So feel free to check out the implementation of the Snowflake in Hutor, so that we can know how many workers we can have in each data center and how many data centers it can support. Okay, it started. Let's go to the browser and endpoint again. So in general, we can see it's pretty much different every time when we hit the endpoint. So that's what you need. If you are interested in the real use case, so if you look into some short URL system of service, in the architecture you will need some distributed ID generator for your service, so that the generated short URL will always be unique. Okay, I think that's the endpoint, but it's not in the proper REST API manner. So let's do something more here. Now let's see, we can simply put a class here called the ID instance. This is the class ID. Now we are going to put string here, okay, or value to make it more sense, and we give it getter. Okay, constructor. Surely you can use Lombok to make the code shorter, but here I'm simply just use it for demonstration purpose. Now here we can return ID, and with return new ID. Okay, so let's see. Let's restart the service. Now you can see this is how we can return the JSON response in the Spring Boot framework. So this is the response. You can see. Okay, so I think that's the ID generator. The other thing I like to introduce is sometimes we don't want to hard code the worker ID. So we like to put in the Spring Boot application properties. So the application.properties is empty for now. So we like to put the snowflake.worker ID. One snowflake data center ID. One. Okay, we can put them here. Now we want to refer to those two properties and get them used by the ID controller. Now we like to define the worker ID, data center ID. Okay. And then we like to do some code refactor here. We don't want to instantly or at the server startup. We don't want to initialize the snowflake. Hopefully we want to lazy load it, and we can implement some function called initialize snowflake. So here, this is what we can do. So this is the worker ID. This is data center ID. This snowflake initialize, and surely we want to synchronize it. Okay. And if this snowflake is not, so we are going to initialize. Now we can put here initialize snowflake. Okay. So if it's null, the snowflake variable is null, it will be initialized. Otherwise, it will move on and generate the ID for the user. We still need to use a value annotation to inject the properties snowflake worker ID. Second one, data center ID. Okay. Now let's see here. Let's add an endpoint and we can do some debug. We should be able to see that at the server startup, the initialization function is not called. You can see it's not called. But when we make the API call, now we can see it's called. The worker ID, data center ID are injected from the properties. And now it's the time to initialize Snowflake. And we just let it move on. Now we can see the random ID, the unique and random ID. Make a call again. Now you can see Snowflake. That breakpoint here is not called anymore, so it means it's not initialized multiple times again and again. So it just initialized once. Okay, that's it for the ID generate. So this is how we can use Whotool supported or implemented Snowflake algorithm announced by Twitter to implement some simple distributed ID generator service. This is just for demonstration purpose. If you are going to use it in your production environment, do check out the implementation of this Hutool library and review, do some benchmark and see if really is what you need in your production environment. And you probably need to set up your cluster or distributed ID generator network to fit in your production. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you feel it's useful, remember to thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Hopefully next time I'm going to wrap this service into a Docker container and publish as an image so you can use simply in your site or in your product. Thanks again. See you. Bye bye.